Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second session of our 3 training sessions for the students who are going to our FutureNow Symposium in Regina on May 3rd. My name is Merle Massey, and I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research. And we have greetings I'll just call it greetings from Dr. Chris Yost, and he is the Associate Vice President of Research at the University of Regina. He is in the Faculty of Science at U of Regina. He's a professor there. He's a molecular biologist, and he studies host microbe interactions. He's also, of course, a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Microbes, the Environment, and Food Safety. And with that, Dr. Chris, if you'd like to pop into my screen, if I can see you, I think you're here. And
yeah, I'm here.
There we go. And we'll go from there. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Great. Well, thanks for the invite. And I'm looking forward to seeing how much I can participate in the session or hang on into the session. But yeah, to start off with, of course, for me, it's very important that I start this by acknowledging where I am placed. And so actually today I am joining you from my home in Regina, not too far from the university, and it is situated on Treaty 4 lands. And these are the territories of the Cree, the Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Dakota groups, and the homeland of the Métis and Michif. And I'm sure, and we also have University of Regina has a presence in Treaty 6 territory, which I suspect many of you, I'm seeing your faces from those territories. So please reflect on where you are today, because this is virtual environment, of course, so we're gathered in different places. Now, with that important acknowledgement, yeah, let me introduce myself a bit. So I'm the Associate Vice President of Research here at the University of Regina. I've been in this position just under 2 years, but before that, for the other 18 or so years, I've been a professor in the biology department at the Faculty of Science. So communicating science is something, or communicating research is something I think about all the time. In my own work, but then now more broadly as Associate Vice President Research. How do I communicate to folks, outward, external partners, the importance of what research is at a university? And so in actual fact, as I was thinking about this greeting, I've been at a university for the past 32 of the past 35 years. So I've really never left university per se. And the reason is because if you think about what universities do, what is their central mission? It is really discovery. And so the University of Regina's 2020-2025 strategic plan actually places discovery as a central focus on what we do at the university. And all of you all the students who are participating, really, you're here at university, you're making discoveries, right? And so that's exciting. What we want to encourage you to do, of course, is make daring discoveries, uncover new knowledge, and make those daring discoveries that will have impacts for yourself, but also for the societies you live in. And so discovery really is that first step, isn't it? That excitement you get when you learn something new, or you've made a discovery that no one's really recognized yet, and you can share that. And it really is the sharing that has the impact. So discovery is the first step. How do you then take that knowledge that you've learned or discovered and translate it? And it's the translation where you're going to see the biggest impacts. And as a scientist, I can tell you, I've had success in doing this, and I've also had absolute failure. My first poster that I presented, how many visitors did I get to my poster, do you think? 1. I'll say it was really lonely. I got 0. And in hindsight, it made perfect sense. I got 0 because I really didn't convey my discovery in a really engaging way. And so what these types of activities do, hopefully, will mitigate so you don't experience those things, right? I didn't have training or mentorship really around my first poster. I sort of just did it the old-fashioned way, like it had been done for eons, but never really thought critically, is this the best way to communicate my science? And so what I think these sessions are really good for is that giving you the tools and the training so that you'll be able to communicate your discoveries, your knowledge, your expertise with politicians. And really, to me, that is the ultimate in knowledge translation, because these are the folks who do enact policy changes, drive those policy changes. And so when you think about how you're going to convey your research, when you're going to come to the ledge, which will be an exciting time, and how you're going to interact with those politicians, really think about what is that effective message, and what tools can I glean on how to deliver an effective message. And that's really what I think these sessions are going to be used for. And that's great that this is occurring. And I'll leave just by really saying, or I'll end this point by just quickly looking, did I cover it? Yeah, the last thing I was going to say is this isn't easy. A 3-minute delivery, a 3-minute pitch, the perfect title, these things take time. So give yourself the time. It's good. What is it? April 5th. All right. When are you going? May something? May 3rd? All right. You got about a month. Guess what? It would take a month. You need to hash out, do several iterations. What is the best title? Talk to your peers, talk to your family. Say, does this make sense? Is this engaging? Come up with that catch, right? And then make sure you dust off all of the sort of extra fluff that you think is really interesting, but stick to that central message. And it takes time, it takes work, but if it's done well, your discovery will have great impact, okay, far beyond what you've picked up just yourself. And so with that, I wish you all the best. Maybe I'll find a way to get myself into that May 3rd thing so I can go and see everyone's hard work and effort. I believe I may be doing some poster session orientation stuff at some point too. We'll see how that goes, but otherwise, I wish you all the best. And thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yost, for coming and chatting with us. It is important for us to remember that we've all been on this path. Here you are as a successful researcher, and yet you still have these vivid memories of your first poster and what it looked like and what happened. And I have, when I was a graduate student, these memories of being the first session at 8:30 on a Sunday morning after a 3 or 4 day conference, and there were 0 people in the room to listen to me except the other presenters. And so, yes, I think all of us have those sorts of stories too. So if a disaster happens, that's because they happen to all of us. However, this time around, that's the purpose of FutureNow. We want to try and mitigate those disasters so that they don't happen. So that's why we wanted to give you a little bit of extra support. So thank you very much for those words of welcome. Sarah, I think everything is better now. At least I'm hoping so. How are things going for you? Can we hear you talk?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome.
And you sound much better.
Good. It wasn't that my COVID was making me Darth Vader. It was my computer that was.
Darth Vader underwater is very special.
Oh.
I'm going to share my screen for you, and then actually, if since we haven't had a chance to do this, Sarah, could you tell everyone who you are at the University of Saskatchewan and why I've asked you here today?
Yeah, and so I was actually going to start. I was going to say, don't share my screen yet, because I want people to actually see me, and so you can hear me chatting a little bit about. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So I studied at the University of Alberta for my undergraduate degree, and fluttered around a little bit. I did science for a year. I did arts for the rest of it. I had a revelation when I was standing in hip waders in the North Saskatchewan River in October, getting water samples, that I did not want to be a scientist standing in the water anymore. So it was a good moment of self-discovery. I was glad that I did that course, because it really told me that I was not meant to be a field scientist, even though I liked all of the stuff and I found it really interesting. It just was not for me. So ultimately, I studied political science. I worked in Indigenous government and in the provincial government in Alberta and the federal government. I worked for the Deputy Prime Minister for a while. Got into government relations at the University of Alberta and haven't looked back. And I've worked in government relations for a really long time now. I've also done, and so government relations doesn't make sense to people who don't know what it is. It's advocacy for the university to government, but it's also managing our relationships. So making sure that we are saying the right things, hopefully doing the right things, making sure that the government likes us enough that they want to invest in us, and really sees the value of what we do. And so I make that case in a lot of different ways. And so one of the things that I have done a lot in my career is you get a phone call from a government office saying, hey, Minister so-and-so wants to come and make an announcement. What can you do to make it look cool? We're giving the university, I don't know, $20 million to study the ocean. What are you going to do about it? And so we come up with, okay, so you definitely want to meet some students. You want to meet some researchers. You want to find out what you're paying $20 million for. The low price, $20 million, you're going to get amazing things, great science. And here are some of the people who are doing it. And so what I would do is I would call on students, not unlike yourselves, as well as grad students, researchers, and I would say, okay, you have 3 minutes. Can you tell this minister, the prime minister, the Prince of Monaco, literally, I did do that, other people, what your project is and actually often less than 3 minutes. How can you explain what your project was that contributes to something that this person cares about and really sees value in whatever it is that they've done? So whether it's $20 million or $100,000 or whatever it is. So one of the things that you always want to do when you're doing these kinds of things, and we're going to get to this right away, is thinking about, what does this person care about? Because we know what you care about your project, but how do you make your project relevant to the person that you're talking to in a way who is for the most part not a non-expert? So Merle, do you want to, and we'll sort of turn the slides on and off because they're pretty bare bones, but they're more just a guide for us to think about. So talking to government, I just want to give you a little bit of context too. So government for universities are absolutely by far the most important funder. And so everybody who earns a buck at a university or a whole salary, anybody who does a major project, you know, we get that funding for the most part from government. So government continuing to believe that what we're doing is important is actually really, really important. Hey Merle, my cat already came across twice, so you're good. So that's the thing I think that is really important is that we do have to recognize that these people that we're talking to are decision makers. They're the people who make the decisions not only about funding, but also about policy. So if you as a scientist, for example, are really interested in water and you've come up with some very important understanding of why, for example, water shouldn't get diverted from one place over to another, or why it's really critical that testing happen in a particular water basin, you need to be able to be convincing about that conclusion so that the people who make the decisions will take your advice and will actually make the decision that you think is the right decision, you as an expert, you as a scientist. And when I say science, I don't just mean science, I should say researcher, because there are so many really, and I'm a social scientist myself, so it's really, really important to include people who, what are people's motivations? Why do people not want to take vaccines? Why do they want to take vaccines? What went wrong with the communication that went from public health messaging to political messaging? And there are, people who really think about those things. So anyway, so if you want to move to the next slide, Merle. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about, we need to know what government cares about. Government cares about, government wants to tell you everything that they care about. They tell you in lots of different ways. I'm going to tell you some of the ways that you can figure it out. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about communicating with government. And then I'm going to say, then we're going to do a bit of an exercise coming up with a very brief summation of the research project that you've done. So if you want to move on, Merle. So in the case of the provincial government, because that's what we're really talking about, there are lots of ways to figure out what they care about. Of course, during an election, it's in your face. They're buying commercials about it. They're telling you in every channel that they can hope to reach you what they care about, or they're trying to convince you that what you care about is what they care about. Once they're actually elected and in government, there are lots of different ways. Every year they do a fun ceremony at the legislature. We're going to go to the legislature with y'all. And they come out in pomp and circumstance and they read a very elaborate speech and they say, this is what we're going to do this year. It's called the throne speech, or the speech from the throne. Anybody can read it. And it sort of identifies the key things that the government is working on that year, and hopefully sort of over the next 4 years of their mandate, or 3 years left of their mandate, whatever it is. In this case, the provincial government has the growth plan, which is sort of the lens through which they are making every policy and funding decision. So every decision that this government makes about what to spend money on, how to decide what they're going to do, comes from the growth plan. So that also is publicly available. It's got sort of 30 goals for 2030. It includes things like vastly increasing the population of Saskatchewan. It includes things like vastly increasing our agricultural output, increasing Indigenous participation in the energy sector, better outcomes on surgeries, faster surgeries. There are 30 really big goals. It basically includes things like getting greater value out of the things that we export and making sure that we're exporting more. So the budget speech is something that happens in our case, the budget just came out. That's also a really big deal because it's the government putting their money where their mouth is. What are they going to be spending the money on this year? They'll tell you in the budget speech, and they'll also give it a line by line. This is what programs we're doing. These are the things that we're funding. These are the things that we're not funding. So you can always tell pretty easily what a government cares about by what they're spending money on. In our case, we have things that the university is really pleased to see every year. So we have a multi-year funding agreement with the government. So we knew this year what base funding we were going to get. That's not always the case. In fact, mostly we all sort of bite our nails waiting to see what the budget is going to bring us. Sometimes it's an increase, sometimes it's a huge cut. You can see our neighbors in Alberta have seen enormous cuts to the university and to research as part of their government's decision making and public policy. So we watch the budget very, very carefully in government relations, and everyone should watch it really because it's pretty fun actually. Annual ministry plans. So if, for example, you are an engineer and you're really interested in road safety, you really want to be looking at the Ministry of Highways ministry plan. If you're an ecologist, you really want to be looking at the Ministry of Environment. If you are a social work person, a sociologist or somebody who does social work, you want to be looking at the Ministry of Social Work and seeing what their real priorities are. Because those are the things that resonate the most with public servants and with elected officials. If you can bring your project into something that they care about, that they've either been mandated by the people in charge to care about, or that they themselves care about, you will make a way more compelling case for the value of the thing that you're doing. Social media, you can also always look at social media and see what the government is tweeting about, what things they're sharing on social media. And of course, the news. If you follow the news, you can see all sorts of statements from ministers and from not usually public servants, mostly ministers. You can see what's going on in government and what they care about. And so as you are thinking about what your presentation should be, I would really encourage you certainly to have a look at the growth plan, if nothing else, to see how you might be able to link your project to something that the government has said that they care about. That is really, really important, because then that's your hook. So for example, if you spent an entire summer dissecting frogs and figuring out how their reproductive systems were affected by pesticides, what is your hook to the growth plan? Well, the growth plan says that we want to make sure that we're doing great agriculture. We also want to make sure that we're protecting our environment through prairie resiliency. So if you say a resilient prairie via frog health, frogs being a sort of a marker of health in a wetland, then that is your hook. That's the thing that you can say, my project about frog reproductive systems really relates to something that you, government official, cares about. So that's kind of the idea. So you want to get to the next slide there? Well, so when you're doing this presentation that we've got you doing, but also generally, like you'll meet government officials at parties, at barbecues, at walking in the grocery store. I wouldn't encourage you to say anything but hello in the grocery store. Don't do pitches in the grocery store. It never goes well. But people do. So give your politician a break and let them buy their oranges. But you can always say hello and they're happy with that. But so when you're communicating with government, especially in an official sort of function, you want to be concise, you want to speak in plain language, and you want to keep it nonpartisan. So let's talk about that very briefly. So the pitch that I just said, I spent the summer working on frog reproduction because we were thinking about how frogs are a marker for the health of a wetland, and the health of a wetland is the health of a prairie. It tells you how resilient the prairie is going to be with climate change. That's pretty concise. I made that project up totally, by the way, out of the top of my head just now. But the idea is that you really think very carefully about how to explain it in very simple terms for the non-scientist, for the non-specialist. So if you start talking about, and then I dissected them, and I did this, and this was what I saw, and and I spent 17 hours looking through a microscope, and that is not actually the thing that they want to hear about necessarily, unless they ask you, so how long did you spend? You want to keep it so concise that they say, oh, that sounds really interesting, tell me more. And then you can start talking about the sort of, and then I was slogging around in a wetland in hip waders in the North Saskatchewan River in October, trying to find water samples. And it was a joy, I tell you. So speaking in plain language, same thing. Don't use a lot of scientific language. Don't use a lot of language that is not comprehensible to the lay person. I like to say, if you think your grandmother probably wouldn't understand you, unless your grandmother is a very accomplished scientist, put that grandmother aside. But if your grandmother wouldn't understand what you're talking about, then you're probably not using the right language. In these kinds of events, this is an advocacy event basically to demonstrate the value of the work that you're doing. If you take it as an opportunity to lambaste your politician for policies that you don't agree with in the current environment, you will completely alienate them, and they will not listen to the message about the great science and the great project you're working on. It's really important to keep it nonpartisan. No matter what your politics are, they should be able to hear and really understand what your project is and why it's important and why it's great value. So I really try very hard to be nonpartisan in my social media, in my everyday conversations with politicians and public servants. I hope that no one would actually be able to guess what my politics are. Because it's important, it's my job to make sure that no matter whether I'm talking to Conservatives, Sask Party, Liberal, NDP, they should think of me as a professional person who can hear what their interests are and will be able to help them in with whatever requests that they have that make sense and that are things that are appropriate for me to give them. So I encourage you in science communication and research communication that you really take that to heart as well, that it's not an opportunity to engage in a political conversation. It's an opportunity to demonstrate the value of the work that we do at the university and the work that you yourself have done in the projects that you've undertaken. So please take that one to heart. Merle, do you want to the next? So your project in 280 characters. Do you think you can do it? Are you ready? I hope you've been preparing yourself emotionally and intellectually for what I've been leading up to here. So what is your project? Who cares, or why is it important, and what is the outcome? So here's an example. studying best wildflowers to attract bees. And, you know, there are lots of different ways to explain why bees are important. Bees, as we know, we live and die by bees. If we don't have bees and pollination, we won't have food. We won't have food. The whole world will die. That's pretty apocalyptic and crazy, but also true. So we care about bees because we all eat. You can say that. And so I think you want to, when you're explaining whatever project it is that you're working on, what it is, like what you did, you were looking at frog reproductive systems and wetlands in native prairie. You were looking at how people interact with their healthcare providers. You were looking at the alienating effect of pamphlets in, you know, in health regional provider waiting rooms. You know, there are so many things that people could be working on, and I don't know all of your projects. You were looking at how we're losing magnets in the world. There's a lack of helium in the world, and you were figuring it out by sending balloons up into the atmosphere. I don't know, but very concise. What were you doing? Why is it important? What is it? What is the fundamental reason that you were doing it? It wasn't because you like sending balloons into the atmosphere. It was because of something else. There was some underlying critical thing that you or your supervisor was wondering, asking, a problem that needed to be solved, a question that needed to be answered. And then what is the outcome? So sometimes not only the outcome, we found mercury in dolphins. But what does that mean for the world, for this government official, for a particular person that you're talking to? So I think that as good research communicators, we want to explain the implications of the thing that we've been looking at. So I spend a lot of time hanging out with researchers. I have really great and fun and hilarious conversations with people across the board, people who map brains, people who look at the intestinal parasites in foxes in the Arctic, who do all sorts of really, really interesting research. And the ones that I come back to over and over again to testify in front of parliamentary standing committees, to host visiting politicians, the politicians who make the decisions about funding and about policy that matters to every Canadian. Those people explain not only their project, but why it's important. And so that's part of your job. And it is not easy. It's not easy to take 3 months, 6 months, 10 years worth of work and compress it down into something that is understandable, really interesting, and very brief. So I wish you good luck. And I think Merle, I don't think we have any other slides after this, right, Merle? We're going to work on this exercise a little bit and get some students, put some students on the spot, I hope.
Yes, so that's the plan. So I'm going to pause the recording at this point so that we get a chance, you know, for everyone to. So what we're going to do is that this is your first.
Sorry, Merle. Sorry, I'm just going to say.
No, go ahead.
Do you have any questions? I didn't even pause to ask if you had any questions, and I would love to answer some questions to prove that it's not just names on a screen, but actual people who are interested.
I think that's brilliant. What's your if I can ask, what's your favorite story of an oops that you did speaking to someone, and either an MP or an MLA? You don't have to tell any names, but
I have some good oopses, but not necessarily about science stuff.
It's okay.
So I can tell a funny story while people are thinking if you want. So
well, we'll work. Maybe there are. We'll set that one aside. Ooh,
yeah.
Sorry.
We want to get cracking.
Yes. So I just want please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one, or put it in the chat and we can ask Sarah. But I wanted to give you guys sort of that recap and overview. So our first exercise that we're going to do today, and then we're going to go back in and we're going to break down what that 3-minute pitch looks like a little bit more after this exercise. So this is your chance to think about your research and break it down into that 280 characters. Pretend that you're going to put it into a tweet, and I'm going to pause the recording, and then in the meantime, if anyone has any questions for Sarah, now is your opportunity. Recording again, and I am going to end the one presentation and put mine on. And Sydney, if you can capture if any of you want to put your 3-minute or your 3-sentence tweet into the chat, and then you guys can have a secondary conversation going on there, I'm perfectly fine with that.
I'm also going to download the chat, Merle, and so I'll have a typed copy of all of everyone's submissions, so we can go through them and send some advice afterwards as well.
Absolutely, and that's fantastic. Thank you, Sydney. We'll absolutely do that. So with that, I'm going to launch in, and like I said, we just wanted to dive in a little bit more on a 3-minute pitch. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm actually a published author. I've been an author, a writer, and I'm a Saskatchewan historian by training. So some of my examples might be coming from my Saskatchewan history background, because being a historian doesn't automatically mean that you know how to talk to a public audience. This is something that I have worked on quite a lot. I've presented on the 3-minute pitch to various groups across campus. And so apologies, my slides are branded USask, not necessarily FutureNow. So apologies to anybody who doesn't like that. But I've also written my own personal land acknowledgement at the University of Saskatchewan. We get a chance to do that, to work with the Guanama Center. And as a settler Canadian of Scottish, Irish, Norwegian, Swedish, and Ukrainian tradition, I am filled with gratitude to live within Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I give respect to the First Nations and Métis of this place and continually value our interconnectedness through Wekutuwin. I too love this land of vast skies and tall trees, Saskatoons and blueberries, and the swift and slow waters of the Saskatchewan River. So what we're going to talk about these are the 3 things that I want you guys to remember. So we are serving, and you are servants in this case. We are serving a non-specialist audience. When we communicate what we've done at the university, we need to be able to put ourselves in that service mindset to serve our audience and think about what the audience needs to know. The second is about storytelling, which is a little bit of salesmanship and a little bit of conversation. So the storytelling aspect, and I'll break that down a little bit too. And then as Sarah already mentioned, practice, practice, practice. So those are the 3 things to remember. And all of the recording from today, which includes both presentations, Sarah's and mine, we will be uploading it to our YouTube channel, and I will send you guys all the link for it as well. So when you're explaining your research to someone else, you're the tour guide, you're the cheerleader, you're the storyteller. You're all of these things kind of put together, which may sound daunting, but if you break it down, really think about the stories that you've heard from other people. The best stories are the ones that are memorable, they're understandable, and they're repeatable. So ideally, you would want them to be able to take what they learned from you, and then they're sitting at the supper table with 5 other MLAs who maybe didn't get a chance to talk to you. And you're like, oh, there was this great presentation from the students today, and this is what they talked about. Even if they just get the gist of it, that very high level gist, that's enough to hook them back in. So those are the 3 things that an ideal story really is. So when we're serving that non-specialized listener, these are some of the things to think about, because it's a big challenge to explain your work to a non-specialist audience. And Sarah said to explain it to your grandma or your aunt who doesn't work at the university. Easter's coming. You can practice this if you happen to have, be going home for Easter or going to be getting together with others for Easter. Practice that little, 3-minute or less pitch to explain your research, and do some practicing with that audience. It is a challenge to explain your research to a non-specialist audience, but this is the part that you already have. You already have mastery of the subject matter. Nobody else with maybe the exception of your supervisor, knows your stuff as well as you do. So the mastery part you've already got. Then you add storytelling devices, and we're going to talk about those. Then you take out all the unnecessary details. And that's all the stuff that the university is interested in. What was your methodology? What was your literature review? All that stuff that the university wants you to put in, you get to take all that out. So just so you know, minus the unnecessary details, that helps you to serve your audience and to give them that very high level overview, so that they're really interested. So this picture came from the USSU symposium last week. This is a poster presentation, and this might be a little bit of what it looks like when we're talking to the MLAs. But still, thinking about it from the audience perspective, what do they want or need to know? And this is where I do that why, how, why. I like to start with why, because I'm interested in this particular high level topic for these reasons, or I am absolutely fascinated by bees. I am absolutely, so the why kind of can become part of your hook, or I'm interested in studying this issue for these reasons. Oftentimes that really helps you to connect to your audience. Then the how, what did you do? And you don't have to get into the weeds. I looked at 87,000 slides, of drops of blood or whatever it is, but just that high level overview. How did you do it? What did you find? And then again, why? And this matters because, and you can break it down that way. So I do the why, how, why. And so why did you look into this? How did you look into this, and what did you do? And then why does it matter? And so if you capsulate it, so the whys become like your parentheses, and the stuff you did is in the middle. So if that helps, hopefully that's one takeaway for you. Because, and here's the critical reason. At the university, what matters often is how smart we sound, because we're interested in promotion, or we're interested in a high mark in the class, or we're interested in how smart we sound. And that may be sort of coming with you as we head to the legislature, but really our goal is how much our audience understands. If each of those MLAs talks to 5 of you or 10 of you and is able to kind of say, oh yeah, there was a student that told me about frogs in the North Saskatchewan River. That's great. So yeah, so how much your audience understands becomes more important. So again, I go back with that start and end with why. Why were you interested in this? What was your personal hook? What did you do? What did you find? And then why does it matter? And I use that because the whole aha moment and waving your magic wand and how did you get invited in this? It's probably not going to be to serve you very well if you say, well, I was looking for a summer job and this one got offered to me. So if you can find a way to make it a little bit more interesting than that, that would probably be a good idea. So why, how, why? That's the first one. The second one is storytelling. So how do we share our work? How do we sell our work? What do storytellers do? And storytellers are all about connection. And this is where things kind of are interesting for us and for this group, because we have the opportunity to connect in 2 ways. We have the written connection that we're going to be developing through the booklet, and we also are going to have the oral in-person connection. So we have the opportunity to connect in 2 ways. But the best way to do it, and Sarah absolutely mentioned this, is to open with a hook. And so I've come up with a few examples and some thoughts on what that might look like. So some people like to spark curiosity. I wondered why this happened, or have you ever wondered why birds like to eat a particular kind of berry? Or have you ever wondered why sometimes in Saskatchewan we can see the sandbars and sometimes we can't? And so you can ask a question like that, sparking curiosity. Have you ever wondered why? You can start with a story clip. These ones work quite well as well. And you can say, when I was 12, my grandma was involved in writing our local history book, and I found the whole process of history really fascinating. And she had papers all over her living room, and normally her house was so clean, and it was a disaster for 2 years. And so that becomes your hook. So whatever it is that it can be a story of something that happened to you. If you did field research and you had something happen, you can frame it that way as well. if you're doing a really really heavy scientific presentation, sometimes this is where an analogy or a metaphor can really become your friend. So if you can think of a really good analogy for your research, let's say that you're researching, and we're going to talk about this example. Todd Stang's coming up. Todd researches multiple sclerosis, and he's specifically researching the holes in the cell wall where things move back and forth. And so in his case, he might be able to use an analogy or a metaphor to really explain what he does. And so that's a possibility. This is especially, like I said, this is especially useful for someone who's got a really theoretical or deeply scientific example. Then sometimes an analogy or a metaphor becomes your friend. Or sometimes you can make a statement. For example, the example that was given around heart attacks. So maybe you can say, in Saskatchewan last year, there were this many heart attacks. Wouldn't it be great if we found a way to, to diagnose that quicker, right when someone shows up at the hospital? So you can, a fact, a statistic, an opinion, a declaration. Oftentimes these can really help. And these are just some examples of hooks. There are others out there. So, but yeah, that might work for you. So, what a hook does is that it creates a hook, not just to hook your audience, but it hooks your audience and you together so that you're having that conversation, whether it's the written conversation, so they read past your first sentence, or in that oral conversation where you can tell because their eyes light up, they're like, oh yeah, my dad died of a heart attack. I'm interested in, reducing the number of heart attacks, that kind of thing. So that's where it's not just you're hooking them, but you're hooking yourself to them. So you're hooking the two of you together. One of the things that's really important is to make it easy for the listener to get to the point as quick as you can. Again, using stories or analogies if it's something that's quite complex. There are times when you have to give a little bit of context or a little bit of background. Just be careful not to overload them with that. That can happen. It's like, I only did this little corner of research, but my supervisor has all these other things going on. That's something for you to kind of be careful of. You can try it if you have to think your way through what your supervisor is doing or what the larger scale research project is, that's okay. But again, one sentence if you can, that context or background. The other recommendation that I have to make it as easy as you can for the listener is to be quite familiar, to use very familiar words, to be very honest, to be to the point, as short as you can. Don't choose a long word when you can choose a short word. Don't choose a scientific, really academic word if you can just say something really quick and simple. Active voice, for those of you who don't know, that's the difference between the door was shut by Merle versus Merle shut the door. So that's the difference between the passive voice and the active voice. We write in academia in the passive voice an awful lot. A lot. And it's a problem because it sinks into your brain. It also gets you more words. And so if you're writing, if it's the night before a paper is due and you got to get up to 10,000 words, man, you're going to write in the passive voice because you get like 6 words instead of 3. And, you get so that, but in this case, we don't have that kind of time. So using the active voice, it also showcases your confidence. You did the research, you're the expert, be confident. So bring that energy and that tone to what you do. When I say plain language, this tends to freak a lot of my colleagues out. They really, really like those long-winded academic words, but these are the things. Remember I had that minus, the things that you can take out. These are your minuses. These are the things that I want you to think about taking out. So no jargon, no technical, no scientific, no theoretical words. And I'm going to give you a list of a few of those that I recommend that you take out. But we even had an example just now, right? In talking about the heart words, and you said, I could say heart attack, or I could use this, really complex scientific word. Just say heart attack, okay? Because then your audience will understand it. No acronyms. So that's another thing that we have at the university all the time. Yes, thank you, Sydney. There's lots of good stuff around plain language, but acronyms are something that we use at the university all the time. If you're going to use an acronym, make sure that you explain it the first time first. then maybe you can use the acronym, but the fewer times you can use it, the better. Yeah, we use NSERC and STEM, and like they become words in and of themselves, but that doesn't mean that our particular audience understands them. When I say academic language, I'm serious. Theory, hypothesis, literature review, methodology, rationale, discourse. These are words that I would prefer not to see.
Virulence.
Pardon me?
Pathology.
Oh,
Virulence.
yes, keep going. All of those kinds of words that are totally normal in the academic community, if you have to stop and explain it to your grandma, you're probably gonna have to stop and explain it to an MLA2. They're busy. They're very intelligent people, but they don't have the same kind of background. So make it as easy for them as you can, and your conversation will go that much better. Short words, short sentences, short paragraphs. This becomes important when you sit down to write what you're going to talk about. So, and active voice, not passive voice. So that's something that I work on. All of my university papers from my supervisor in my 4th year when I was doing my honors, I had my papers come back and they had PV written all over them, PV. And I had to like, what does that mean? Passive voice. I was bad for it. It took me years to train it out of me, and I'm going to try and train it out of you guys in like 3 weeks. Go Merle. When we can do this actually when you're giving, if you're giving a presentation, let's say that you're giving a presentation at a symposium or something like that. Sometimes you can have you can insert some strategic, it doesn't have to be a one-way chat all the time. You can have a bit of a strategic interactive conversation. You can stop and say, we did this, what do you think happened when we did this, you know, and then you can stop and ask, make sure that you've set it up well. But sometimes you can have that, you can insert a few questions in there, and that helps to get a little bit of that interaction. We tried doing this to test this, what do you think happened? And then you can say, no, that totally, it went this direction, we thought it was going to go over here. It helps to have that kind of interactive conversation. If you're not comfortable with this, or if this feels really problematic to you or scary, you don't have to do it. But if you're a really gregarious kind of a person, it's a good way to kind of guide and clarify only when they're allowed to interact. And then after that, you can continue the conversation. But if you're the kind of person who likes to have a little bit of interactive instead of a 3-minute monologue, you can insert a few of these in. So this is just a suggestion. One of the things, I love this cartoon. I like to verb words. What? I take nouns and adjectives and use them as verbs. Remember when access was a thing? Now it's something you do. It got verbed. Verbing weirds language. And then Hobbes says, maybe we can eventually make language a complete impediment to understanding. I've always loved that one because there are a whole lot of words that we use in academia, like implement, do. Cost, impact, considerations, price, utilize. I hate the word utilize. Just say use. Construct or produce. We construct. I made this. I made that. Or turning nouns into verbs. Impacted. I mean, unless it's a wisdom tooth, I don't want to hear that word. But that's just me. So there's a whole list out there of words that have been turned into verbs. So that's something else to just kind of pay attention to. If you're not going to talk that way to your grandma, maybe try and find a way to take it out. Showing your enthusiasm is a good thing. And we want you to bring your whole self when you come to this. So your enthusiasm for what you did is actually going to be your best selling feature. And then why does this work matter? That's really where, and it doesn't just have to matter to Saskatchewan, or it doesn't necessarily just have to matter to the university or to your particular research project. You can actually talk about where you can see it making an impact, but that includes on yourself. You know, I did this research project. I learned a whole lot of skills that I can take because I want to be a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. You know, so you can also talk about it that way, not just what the research is doing and how the research is going to go forward, but the skill sets that you yourself learned from doing the project and how that made an impact on you. It's a perfectly valid thing to talk about, especially with an MLA. And in fact, I would guess that a lot of them are going to ask, that might even be the first question that they ask. What did you learn from this? Where are you going to go with this? How is your university learning going to take, how are you planning on taking it forward throughout your life? I'm guaranteeing you half of you at least will get asked that question at least once. So this is, and so that's why I put this in. What if they ask questions? They might even interrupt you and ask questions. That's good. That means they're engaged and they're paying attention, which is awesome. This is what you want to do. But some good things that I've found to talk about, if they do start asking questions, they're interested in, like, if you could go back and do it again, what would you do differently? What did you learn along the way? You know, what were sort of the oopses and the problems in your path? They're interested in that kind of thing. Another thing that you could talk about is what's needed to get this work to the next level. So, you know, we've been studying drought, and wow, you know, the drought of 2021 was great, and that's super. I really need to get my hands on some Environment Canada data so that we can analyze, you know, past droughts and, you know, that kind of thing. So what's needed to get this work to the next level? And then going back to that, what skills did you learn from this work that you're taking with you? That's something that I encourage you to bring up, especially if the MLA engages you in some conversation. So that's a good thing to chat about.
And so Merle, can I interrupt?
Yep, absolutely.
One of the most important things in advocacy and research communication is reading the room. So you can tell when someone is interested, they're kind of leaning forward, they're asking you questions, they're looking engaged. And sometimes you can see when you're making them defensive, their shoulders are going up, they're kind of backing up a little bit. Seriously, take the cues, take the unspoken cues. They're not going to necessarily challenge you verbally, but they might just walk away and not listen anymore. So do pay attention to their body language, and read the room a little bit, and maybe go down a different path. Also, let them lead you down a path, because if they're interested in asking you questions, you don't need to stick to your script, because you are the expert in your project and you can just go off to the next thing. Sometimes they don't know the question to ask you, and sometimes you can actually answer the question that they haven't asked, but you want to answer. So just think about that, how to do it in a gracious way. So there you go.
Super. Thank you so much for adding that in. That's absolutely true, reading body language, which actually brings us to the final stuff. So the third thing is practice, practice, practice. And so this is kind of how I would really like you to spend your next 3 weeks. This is a picture that I took on Thursday at the USSU symposium. This is Maya Hool, and she is singing an original song called Resilience. And she sang it for us at the symposium. So plain language is stronger, not weaker, than academic language. And this is why. We speak to such a variety of audiences, but sometimes we forget that the people in our audience, they may not have the technical background as us, or English might not be their first language, or whatever language you're speaking, it might not be their first language. And so the plainer you can get your whatever you want to say, the plainer you can say it, the better. It will make your academic writing better too. If you think back to those papers that you reference, and they've been referenced by 2,000 other people, they're like at the top of the charts, there's a reason why they're referenced. And usually it's because they're not crazy technical. That's because everybody who reads them can understand them. And they understand them the first time they read them. So that's what we're aiming for as much as we can. But we do actually want you to sit down when you have a chance, when your classes are done and you've got a lull between exams, is to actually sit down and write out what you think you're going to say, what your verbal 3-minute pitch might look like. So think about your key points, what you want to say, and then you can tell it like a story. So that's the hook, that's the introduction or the context. I'm interested in this, or whatever it is that you think is going to be a good hook. And then your rising action, that's what you did. So I'm thinking like a novelist here, so apologies for that. But your rising action, what you did. Your climax is what you discovered, so what your research told you. And then your finale, why does it matter? So if you think about it that way, it gives you a bit of a story arc, and it actually becomes a circle because your why to start with and your why to end, they hook together. Write it out and then edit it back to basics. You're gonna, as you go through the process, you will very quickly learn to take out the extras, especially if you follow what we're gonna say next. So when you write and when you speak, if you read what you wrote out loud, you're actually going to be able to go back and rewrite it and cut things out. So having your written and your spoken together and doing it this way, write it out and then speak and then write it out and then edit it. It actually is quite an iterative process. I've now written 4 books, and I have read every word of those 4 books out loud in my office with nobody else listening. And every time I tripped, that was my signal that I needed to go back and fix that sentence. So it's actually a really good editing tool. So if you're writing project reports and you're at the end of your classes, read it out loud and you'll find a whole bunch of stuff. I always do. So I read it out loud. Sometimes I time myself, especially if I know that I'm trying to aim for a particular time, because it'll help me remove all the ums and ahs and things that I do, because I'm very bad for those. They happen all the time. Every time you trip, or every time you're like, oh, I forgot to tell them about this and this is important, then you can kind of learn what's important and what's less important. So then you go back in, you cut, you revise, read it out loud again, and then you go find a friend or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a significant other or a random stranger on the bus who can't run away or whatever. And practice with an audience. That's why our next session on the 26th is going to be, we are going to have each of you practice with an audience and get some feedback a week before we go to the legislature. And we've done that very deliberately. And then you can incorporate that feedback and practice again. When we're there, you guys might laugh at me about this, but your voice is actually part of the story. And so before we let the MLAs in, I'm going to quietly shut the doors, and we're actually going to be doing some stretching, and we're going to be doing some voice work. We're going to warm up our voices so that we're ready to go. And the reason why we do that is because it will, if you warm up your body and warm up your voice before your presentation, it actually gives your body a huge amount of confidence. If you're like me, you might potentially be a little bit nervous, and that's okay. I'm thinking of that. We're going to try and address that and help everybody. There's lots of ways. Oh, thanks, Sid. There's lots of ways for voice tools and tricks. Pacing, fast when you're excited. Remind yourself to slow down. Pitch, loud, soft, and your tone. And don't rush. Give your audience time to process. And that's something that I'm often not so good at. Body language is part of it. And so we're going to do some stretching and some body language. I can't speak without moving my hands a lot, but some people find it distracting. It's something I think about, but try not to worry about it too much. As Sarah mentioned, we're all going to dress as professionally as possible. It is a professional space, so we'll try and do that. If you have time, you can record yourself practicing and watch yourself for strengths and weaknesses. But if you don't have time for that, we've got your back on April 26th to try it. And we're going to have a number of people come outside of the FutureNow group and we'll put one in each room to give you guys some feedback. And so the last thing, and this is something we often forget, is to introduce yourself. They'll be standing in front of you and it's like, hi, my name is Merle. I'm at the University of Saskatchewan. So start with that, and then you kind of go into your pitch. And then you thank them for stopping to chat with you. Todd, I have a great example here from Todd, and I know that we're out of time, and so I apologize for that. Todd gave a great example of his really technical one. This is what he gave to the USSU symposium. So this was for an academic audience. But then he gave another one. this is his revision. And what I'm actually going to do is that I'm going to send those two around in an email to give you guys a bit of a sense of what that looks like, because then you can break it down. And Todd might even want to do some more work on this, which is perfectly fine. But he did do a really good job of showcasing the difference between a really technical and then one that I could understand. So I'll copy and paste and I'll send it around to everyone, because I'm respectful of your time. So yeah, those are the three things. We're serving a non-specialist audience. We're going to use some storytelling tools. And in the next 3 weeks, your job is to practice, practice, practice. And with that, I'm going to stop presenting and stop share. And any final thoughts?
Wear comfortable shoes because you're going to be standing for a really long time. And no kidding, that's important. Don't wear stilettos unless you can stand in them for 3 hours.
Oh, damn.
Oh, Matt. Oh, yeah.
Well, now I got to start over.
I'm going to have really awesome shoes because I love awesome shoes. It's my thing. But yes, agree. Comfortable shoes are a thing.
I have a question, and it may sound like a stupid one, but it goes for my presentation. Like I want to, like, I will be as professional as I need to be, but I also find that to keep people interested, I find I'm fairly good at trying to make them laugh a little bit, you know, like throw in a little bit of a comedic twist every now and then. Like, I don't want it to come across as like brash or like unprofessional or anything, but it's more so in an effort to hook them in. Do you or maybe Sarah can speak to this, is that usually a good idea or?
Always a good idea.
Awesome. Okay.
You get a nice laugh, you get some solidarity, you get some sort of people feeling like they're in the trenches with you. That's all good stuff. It makes you more memorable, and people sometimes won't remember necessarily the full content of your thing, but they'll remember how they felt about it.
Right.
That's
and
so
if
you make them laugh a little bit, but also give them something to think about, they walk away with a really positive feeling. And they might remember, oh, you know, that guy, the heart disease guy, yeah, that was really good, that was really interesting, I'm going to ask more about that, you know, something like that. Because I think, and I think that Morel said it once again, the ideal scenario is these people walk away and they tell someone else about at least one of the things that they learned. I was talking to this woman from University of Regina, and she was working on this incredible project about bats. Did you know that bats eat more insects than, you know, like something like that? That's gold. That is gold. So,
well, you know, whatever I can do to make the government remember me more, that's what I'm after.
Well, health research, that's what we really want funding for. So
yeah, no kidding. Sydney, did you want to chat a little bit about the booklet and just kind of I've been having a bit of a background conversation. So students from the University of Regina, Mel Hart has been working on your abstracts to get them sort of more set for a public audience. So I've been working with Mel on that, and we're going to continue to work with Mel. And I've been working with the USask students again on the same thing to kind of translate our really high-tech academic stuff for, you know, a more public audience. But Sydney, if you want to talk about the booklet a little bit and where we're at with it, that'd be super.
Yeah, sure thing. It'll literally be 30 seconds. Like, I know people have to go and I have stuff to do today as well. So this is an example of what the page is going to look like when we have a student project. So we're hoping to have one page in the booklet for every student project. It's going to include your name, your title, a little bit about you, and then about a 50-word bio. So get thinking about what you might want to include in the bio. It shouldn't include any of the information that's already above, but it could include your major, why you're in this area, etc. And then you're going to have a very short 150-word-ish abstract. So the abstract is going to be similar to what we were doing today in that it's very short, very directed. It's not too much in the weeds. And I will be sending out some information about that with Merle later in the week. We'll probably have everyone submit a short version of the abstract, and then we'll probably send out some edits and then get them back again. But like I said, you guys will get some more information about that this week. I just wanted to show you so that you can get thinking about that while this information is fresh.
I just wanted to say that there's a couple of projects that have more than one student. And so, Rebecca, that might have been your question. I'm not sure, but go ahead and ask your question. We are aware of that. And so because we are in charge of the booklet, we can make a few choices, but there are a couple of projects that have more than one student. And so we may need to do some jigging just to make sure that we mention all the student names and a little bit about each of you if we can fit it in.
My guess is that the multi-student groups will just have 2 pages, one for all of the bios and one for the abstract.
Rebecca, go ahead.
That answers my question.
Excellent.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, we might have to go for 2 pages for that, and that's perfectly fine. I apologize for being 6 minutes over, but that's because you guys are so engaged. It was awesome. It's fantastic. But yes, so today was sort of the warm up and the practice. Go ahead for the next 3 weeks. Take a break, do your schooling, but give yourself the time to write out what you think you're going to say, because the more that you practice it, the more you have it locked in, which Sarah mentioned, the easier it will be, especially if you happen to get nervous in the moment. If you've practiced it a few times, it'll just come pouring out, which is what we all want.